Today we advertise we have one special guest, which is Rusty Nelson from Western Power Sports. He's a vendor of ours and a really good supporter of the industry. Has a really long-term vested interest in the business side and personally. And we also have a second guest, John Cottle. So we will have the benefit of both of these guys today. And the primary discussion will be clutches, clutch maintenance, belts, the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, when you need to change a belt and it's an emergency, what are things to do and not do, and also how to protect your belts, your spare belts. And then we'll open up for any discussion any of you would like to talk about. So with that, we'll introduce Rusty and have him tell us about clutches and belts and go from there.
My background has been in this industry my whole life. I grew up, and I was just talking to a gentleman here from North Idaho. So I grew up with snowmobiles and I grew up with quads. Polaris first came out with their quad. It was belt driven, just like what you guys drive now with the side-by-sides. So indirectly, I've worked a long time with the CVT setup. And last month, he asked me if I wanted to come out and do a quick tech talk and discuss why and how clutches work, and try to explain it to you guys. Some of you probably already know. You probably already had your belts off and seen your clutching and how the transmissions work and everything. But I wanted to kind of break it down, with John also being here, kind of how a clutch works and how a secondary clutch works and how it applies power and what actually drives the vehicle that you're driving. So, do you all know what a CVT system is? Automatic transmission basically is what that is.
Continuously variable transmission.
Yep, it constantly changes with the RPM of your vehicle. And this is the clutch that pretty much drives the belt. And in this, there's no spring in here, so there's usually a spring in here that holds tension open, and as you rev the vehicle up, it starts to close, and it closes and engages onto the belt. This is always spinning. Whenever your car is running, it's always spinning. As you accelerate, this changes dynamically, starts to close, and then it pulls the belt down the secondary. And this starts out closed and it opens up. And as it opens up, it's actually fast, but as it opens up, it changes the whole way your car shifts. So you don't have to change gears, it's fully automatic, it changes a ratio throughout its RPM range. This, when you're stopped, is not moving. This, when you're stopped and idling, is constantly moving. So just by knowing that principle of how the CVT system works, you can already tell there's already going to be sufficient dynamics in place when it comes to how a belt works. This is not moving when you're not moving. As soon as you start to go, it engages and it starts to drive the secondary clutch. And then next thing you go, you're going faster and faster, and it's shifting for you, and it's doing all the work. So as you can tell, some people have two-seaters that are 1,500 pounds. Some people have four-seaters that could be up to 2,000 pounds loaded, all being driven off of this piece of rubber. So how many of you have blown a belt? Probably all of them. And how many of you have been frustrated breaking your knuckles on the trail side, putting a new belt in, and wondering why belts last and don't last? Right? So inside of each clutch are a bunch of different moving parts, and each of those moving parts are designed to wear out. So it has to move, it has to be smooth. Inside of each one of these clutches are bushings, and rollers, and weights, and it's all kind of complicated, but that's what causes this transmission to work. So without getting too complicated, there's some maintenance that has to take place. When you buy your vehicle brand new, the belt that's in it has probably been broke in from the factory with the clutch that's in it, with the transmission side clutch that's in it, and it all kind of gels together at once, and it's the greatest, longest lasting belt that you probably ever had. What causes issues with belts later on is once your clutching starts to have any kind of wear and the bushings shift differently or maybe it travels differently down the primary shaft, this is actually bolted to your engine. Once this starts to change, everything starts to wear outside. These plastic buttons, and there's all these little pivots and rollers, and all that stuff eventually will start to wear out, and your clutch also needs maintenance. It's designed to be serviced. This is an example of a clutch that's been in the vehicle for quite a while. I'm not sure if it's got any time on it, but as far as written on here. But you can kind of hear how this whole thing moves around. That's because this travels along this triangle spider, they call it, and it has two bushings. Where this is brand new, it makes very little noise. So that's the internal side of the clutch that would cause any kind of maintenance issues. And then on the secondary side, there's also bushings, and there's also things that wear out as well, which require maintenance. So the biggest problem with belt failure is once you put a new belt in, there's a break-in period. Knowing that all of this stuff is moving all the time, whether you're moving or not, this is spinning, this is static, this is spinning on that while it's static. Once it engages and it starts to drive this, it has to heat up. So if you blow your belt in the trail and you put a brand spanking new belt on here, you take it out of the package, put it in, there's basically a process. You should always wash the belt. There's conditioner on rubber that keeps it fresh, just like a tire does. When you buy a tire from Discount, it has some conditioning agents on it that keep it from drying out prematurely. If this belt is stored outside or banging around in your trunk and you go to use it, it's already got some time, dust, it's been drying out already on it before you even use it. So it's important to wash the belt before you put it in if you can. Any water, any way you can, try to wash and clean the surface of the belt. All of you have had brake jobs. It's similar to how brakes would break in together on a rotor. You want the belt to be able to mate with the new surface that it's going to, so you have to be somewhat easy on it. Wash the belt first, put the belt on, and drive it easy. A lot of people will be at the dunes, they'll be with the group, they'll put the new belt in and drive it the same exact way they did when the first belt blew. And it takes some time for this belt to go through a couple heat cycles and break in to the shape of the clutch. Which brings me to the next topic. When you buy your vehicle new, the clutch is brand new, all the bushings are great, all the surfaces of the clutch surface are brand new. As you drive it, it could be 3,000 miles. We all have a comfort zone that we like to drive in, whether it's 15 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. What ends up happening is this clutch is made out of aluminum. These are rubber. Different componentry goes into each price point belt. The OEM manufacturers use a little more sturdy componentry inside there, whether it's fiberglass or carbon or it could be Kevlar or something like that makes their belts maybe last longer in the eyes of the consumer. But in the process, it also leaves a telltale sign on the surface of the clutch. It'll actually make a little groove of where you like to drive and what speed you like to drive. So when you put a new belt on and you have a nice flat surface, just like a brand new pair of brakes in your car, it's got to kind of get broke into the surface of the clutch. And so you have actual dimples in this V.
Pass those around so they can see the difference.
Yeah.
Pass around the new one as well. And you can see the shifts where the belt rides, and you feel the grooves and the imperfection there on the used clutch versus the new one.
Now I'm not sure how much time that clutch has on it, but it doesn't really matter. There's always going to be wear on aluminum, and as you drive, where your comfort level is for speed is where that wear is going to be. So the new belt has to travel through that the same way your old belt did. So if you can kind of
the shift wear, just to answer the question. The shift wear is not necessarily from warm bushings. The shift wear that you're looking at right there on the tapered part of that clutch, that's from just wear, right? So like he said, different compounds of belts are going to affect that. Certain belts, like in my experience, the Gates belts create more shiv wear than the OEM belt, in my experience in the razors, but different compounds of belts will where it's a catch-22. You get a really soft, like a drag tire. You get a really soft, sticky tire. It's got a lot of traction. A soft, sticky belt. It's going to hook up on that clutch really good. It's not going to last very long. You get a really hard compound belt. It's going to last longer. It's going to wear that clutch out before it wears the belt out. So it's a catch-22 of the right compound for belt longevity as well as clutch longevity. The first thing to go on the primaries are the shift weights, which are there's 3 of them in there in that spider. That badge clutch is being passed around. I'm sure you're going to get into it. You can actually see the top of that shift weight. Instead of being a nice moon, it's got a divot in it because it's worn out. And then there's rollers in there. They're 5,000 miles tops. And not to take over his speech, but on the same aspect, at 5,000 miles, these clutches are rebuildable, okay? You can put new steel rollers in there. You can put new shift weights in there. You can take the clutch apart and press out the bushings on the movable shift as well as the cover plate and replace them. By the time you pay for the parts and the labor to replace all those components, the clutch itself is still worn out. That aluminum shiv that's getting passed around, you can see is no longer flat, is never going to be flat. That's not, unless we were to chuck it up on a lathe and resurface it, that's never going to be flat. The spider, the towers on the movable shiv that ride on that spider, there's 6 buttons in there, 2 per deal. Those wear out and they're replaceable. But as you look on that worn out clutch, the aluminum channels on the movable shiv are grooved and notched. So you put new plastic wear items, new buttons in there, they're going to last a fraction of the time as new because they're not riding on a smooth surface anymore.
The cost of replacement.
If you go new clutches are, depending on the model, just let's say $500 to $600 a piece. And if you were to rebuild them for $400 a piece, you're only going to get a fraction of the time. So a fraction of service time out of them. So that's why we tend to just replace them. You get more bang for your buck.
Is that the same flare as a Can-Am?
No, Can-Ams, we very rarely do we replace clutches. I have customers with over 10,000 miles in their Can-Ams on factory clutches. They're designed different. It's a 6-tower primary clutch instead of a 3-tower. It's got stainless steel slides. What I was just talking about where the button's right on that aluminum channel and it leaves grooves. The Can-Ams have stainless steel wear plates to eliminate that. Can-Am clutches are generally good for closer to 10,000 miles.
What absolutely ruins belts is, and they test this at the factories, that the manufacturers will test it like this. They'll put it in a vehicle, they'll stop and go over and over and over again until that belt fails. So they will stop and they will floor it, and it fully engages this clutch, which means you could be going 8 miles an hour, and when they step on the gas and that acceleration and RPM go up, this clutch closes. So it runs the belt to the top of this clutch and to the bottom of that clutch before it even gets up to speed. So that means it's spinning on both surfaces until it catches up with itself. So it's so much pressure that's happening at that moment, and that's why belts typically blow before break-in period. And if you do that over and over and over again, that's like the doomsday for a belt. It's just rubber. Now, it's amazing what they can do with rubber and the componentry they use, just like tires. There's all kinds of stuff in tires. We sell those too. Now, with that being said, if you understand how a belt is somewhat made and understand how to break it in, you can get the maximum amount of life out of the belt. And it doesn't matter what manufacturer it is. I feel, as long as you know how to preserve it and as long as you know how to break it in. So, keeping a belt zip tied to your cage, and they make nice brackets for that. Be aware, it's just like a tire that doesn't get pulled on a trailer for a long time. It will dry out eventually. If it doesn't get used all summer and you leave it in the garage all winter, or vice versa, I guess, out here, it'll be, when you come back, it's gonna have dust all over it, it's gonna be dirty, it's gonna also be exposed to the elements. It's not a good combination to be able to rely on your spare belt if it's been hung in a rack the whole time. I encourage you to keep it out of the light, keep it out of the weather, and keep the dust off it by putting it in some kind of a container bag.
One thing I've seen that's somewhat common, hell, I even used to do it, is these belts are designed to be round. You don't want to, it's pretty easy to twist that belt up. Hell, that'll fit your glove box. That's not good on the belt. It shouldn't be bent that way. It'll end up cracking the belt and damaging it.
Yeah, and nor do you want to do this. You definitely don't want to do
Bend
this
it backwards.
because what you're doing is you're turning this one here negative, and it'll literally crack the inside of this belt. Eventually, if you store it like this, it'll break that belt in there, and you won't even know it's happening. And then all of a sudden, you'll be driving, and you feel this clunk, thump, 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 every time you're going. And what happened was is this inner tooth just came off. And then if it sounds like the transmission's going out and it's banging, it sounds crazy, but it's literally it's missing a couple of these inner teeth. And that's just basically so the belt can flex around the clutches. So that's why there's a gap in between those. But you could lose one of those teeth, and especially if you fold it backwards. So you want to try to keep it into this natural shape of what the clutch is going to run on. So someone with this bag here, when they come in these packages, that's how you want to store it if you can. I suggest a bag. It keeps it dry. It keeps the dust off of it. And that's another factor too, is the dust. When you put it on there, it's a slip agent. And if that belt slips when you go to take off, it'll literally, if this doesn't move and this engages on the belt and it stays there for could be just a second or two, it could hourglass the belt. And that means it makes a divot like this because the pressure of the belt or pressure of the clutch engaging on it. Now you have another thump when it goes around every time. Thump, 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 thump. It'll do the same thing, and then now you have an issue of basically potentially wearing your clutch surface out just because the belt, if it lives throughout that, it'll definitely put more wear on the surface of your clutch just because you have an imperfection on the face of the belt.
Good.
So you said a break-in period. What's the best way to break it in? Varying your speed, or?
Every manufacturer is different. Varying your speed is good. Just what kills a belt is fast acceleration from a dead stop and forcing this clutch to engage and shift it all the way to the bottom of the secondary. That puts so much heat and pressure on a belt, and if it's slipping the whole time because there's either dust on the surface of the belt or there's the preservation agent on it, it'll slip and it'll overheat the belt. And then once it overheats, it starts to delaminate. So it starts to basically, all the glues start to separate on it, and that's when it blows apart. So yeah, for each belt's a little different, but at least maybe 20 miles, is that what you recommend of easy driving?
So I recommend to start with, you got a new belt, and like what he's been mentioning, if you got this old clutch and you've blown a belt, you're gonna have rubber, stuck to this clutch, right? So like he said, cleaning the belt, washing the belt with some soapy water, as long as you get all the soap off, you got to get all any slick, just water would be fine. I usually use some water and a little Scotch-Brite pad or something on the belt, scrub it up. Same thing with the clutches. You need to take this clutch shiv, which when you guys pass this around, you see the discoloration there, right? So some Scotch-Brite on this clutch shiv to get all the residual rubber and stuff off of it, to try to get it as close to that as possible. And then don't spray brake clean directly on the clutch, but some brake parts cleaner or alcohol or something on a rag. Wipe that off. Your rag is going to be black when you're done. So you get those clutches as clean as possible, the belt as clean as possible. My braking procedure is exactly what he said as far as varying your speed. The only difference is I break the belt in low range. The reason for that is in low range, when this clutch compresses, it compresses due to speed, right? So this clutch is never going to fully compress until you're to the top speed. So in low range, you can run that belt up and down this shiv, right? Because it's going to upshift and downshift without having a high load on it. In high range, in order to run that belt throughout the full travel of that shiv, you're going to be under an extreme load, right? In high range, you're going to be slipping that belt while you're trying to break it in. Low range, accelerate, decelerate 2 or 3 times, and you do a heat cycle. You can build some heat in that belt, shut it off, let it cool down, and then ride like normal. Biggest thing, like we've always talked about in our tech talks, is taking off in low range. That way you don't hourglass the belt like he mentioned. If you're in high range and you apply a little bit of throttle and the machine doesn't roll, now that clutch is spinning against this belt, the belt's not turning. It takes literally a couple of seconds to leave a notch in that belt. We have plenty of examples of them. And belts blow due to heat. Most of your high-speed riders, your Glamis riders, stuff like that, high-speed desert riders, they're the ones that have had the experience in blowing a belt due to overheating it. Most of our belt replacements here are due to people notching them from taking off at high range, trying to climb over an obstacle in high range, and that clutch can't grip that belt in that tall of a gear, and it slips on it and leaves an hourglass notch. But braking procedure, low range, and cycle your speed a couple times, and then let it cool down. Again, these clutches work like bicycle gears, right? So what that means is when you're going slow, you have a small diameter in the front and a large diameter in the back, which gives you a low gear ratio. As you accelerate and this clutch compresses, it's getting a larger diameter in the front, smaller diameter in the back. High range of your machine, let's just pick a Razor 1000. Its gear ratio in its transmission and the clutches are geared to do close to 80 miles an hour. Now, whether or not you have, there's a lot of factors. I'm not saying that every Razor 1000 is going to do 80 miles an hour. I'm saying it's geared capable of doing 80 miles an hour, right? So what that means is when you're cruising around at 10 or 20 miles an hour, this clutch is barely compressed at all. It's still in its essentially first gear, which means this belt is going around a tight radius in the front and a large radius in the back. To create more heat, to create more stress on the belt, and it's slipping. The ideal, the most efficient gear ratio for CVT is a 1-to-1, meaning halfway up this sheave, halfway down the secondary sheave, a 1-to-1 ratio. You got a nice oval belt, you don't have any sharp bends, everything's happy. The only way to get a 1-to-1 ratio is halfway through your gears. So an example is a Razor 1000 that is geared to do 80 miles per hour. At 40 miles per hour, it's in its 1-to-1 ratio. It's where everything's happy and cruising. You run at 40 all day, probably never blow a belt. When you start getting to the other extremes at 80 miles an hour, now this clutch is fully shifted out. That belt's right at the top. It doesn't have as much grip. It's all the way in the bottom of that. Tighter circumference. Now you're gonna create that belt. You can blow the belts, like I mentioned about the Glamis guys and the high-speed desert riders. Can-Am X3s are different. There's a lot of variables, but let's say a regular Can-Am Maverick that Roger has, most of your players, Razor 1000s, they have a top speed of 40 miles an hour in low range, which means at 20 miles an hour, you're in that ideal 1-to-1 ratio. So what I've told people here in the past is absolutely, if you're doing 25 miles an hour and under, depending on the machine, and not a Can-Am X3, Can-Am X3 will only do 25 miles an hour in low range, is different. But on most machines, low range on trail riding at 25 and under. Same token, if you're cruising down the trail at 25 miles an hour in low range and that belt's 1-to-1 ratio, and now you got to accelerate to 35 or 40 for just a few seconds, that's fine, it's not going to hurt it. But if now you're going to be cruising down a dirt road at 40 miles an hour and you're still in low range, now the clutches are fully maxed out, you need to stop and put it in high range. If you're out on the trail and you blow a belt, we've talked about cleaning a new belt with soap and water. We've talked about Scotch-Briting these shivs with green or red Scotch-Brite and brake cleaning and wiping down with alcohol. We've talked about breaking that belt in a couple of heat cycles, right? Who on the side of the trail is going to do all of that stuff? Nobody. No one.
And if you're in a group, are you going to be able to go slow enough to break your belt in correctly?
So what I do is, and we talked about storing a belt, trying to keep the dust and the dirt and stuff off of it, right? I carry a used belt. If I brought it in for service and I got a belt that's got a little notch in it or something and we recommend replace it because you've hourglassed it or something, carry it for a spare. Because that belt's going to get you home. That way when you're out on the trail and you blow a belt, you don't have to worry about cleaning these clutches. You don't have to worry about breaking that belt in. You don't care at that point. Slap that used belt on there, hit the trail, finish your day. When you get home, you got time in your garage, pull that clutch cover back off, clean up these shivs, clean up your new belt kit sitting on the shelf, put it on there, make a couple laps around the block, break it in, take that belt you just took off, put it back in your storage bag, and away you go.
Yeah, sure. Another thing that we didn't talk about there was those clutches are going to be smoking hot. So if you're out on the trail and you're digging into it, you've got to have gloves on, right?
Or let it cool down because it is very hot. Yeah. And something else too is all these belts have cords in them, and a lot of times the cords will stay intact in the shape of the belt, and they're just strings, and they'll wrap around the back side of the clutch. So try to make sure you get all those pieces out from behind. Sometimes it'll also wrap around the crankshaft, right where this fastens to the motor. You can't see it, but there might be something wound up back here. So be aware of that
and stuff. All of your clutch housings, no matter what the brand is, you have an air inlet and an air outlet. Most of your Razors, even the XP900s and the 1000s, the air outlet, the exhaust for that clutch housing, comes up right above the header pipe, right in front of the motor, and it's got a little metal screen right there. I've had cars come in for service with pieces of blown belt laying on the header pipe because it came out right there and it was nowhere to go. So if you put a new belt on it, and your airflow is restricted because you got all this old belt stuffed in the inlet and the outlet, the new belt's not going to last very long either. It's going to get hot and explode. So you want to make sure that all of your ducting is clean. In my personal experience, I have not noticed a difference in belt longevity or belt life, no matter what type of online myth I've read about breaking it in and heat cycle and any of that. Me personally, what I feel is most important and what's worked best for me is to run that belt, exactly what Rusty was describing in the beginning, is that the angle of this belt is driven off the sides, not the cogs, not the top, it's driven off the sides. This angle may not match the angle of that shib anymore because these shibs are worn, there's variances. Low range, run it, stop to full speed to stop half a dozen times, you know, not hard, you don't have to floor it, you just want to run it through them speed cycles, which means that belt's going to run up and down this shib half a dozen times. Put it in high range and run the piss out of it. That's what I've always done. It's worked for me. Biggest thing is matching that belt to that clutch. As far belt temperature issues aren't really an issue with most of the club riding and the riding we do here because you guys aren't really getting to the speeds. Although we sell belt temperature gauges. And back to that gentleman's question about the low range, me and another customer had two identical machines. We rode up to the Wallapies. We both had belt temperature gauges. We were curious. So at 20 miles an hour in high range, we were consistently 20 degrees higher on the belt temperature than at 20 miles an hour in low range. Because it's more efficient. You got that 1-to-1 ratio, don't have the tight bends. You know, with the belt temperature gauge, you can really monitor that. You can see what's happening. Belt temperature gauge is not going to monitor an hourglass scenario. You're going to do that in a couple of seconds. You ain't going to build enough heat. You're just destroying the belt in a few seconds.
Yeah, you won't really know it unless you see smoke. And after that point, it's probably too late.
Right. In our vehicle, if you're sitting at a stoplight and we're on an incline, you might be inclined to sit there and put your foot on the throttle just enough to hold you from moving, right? Just apply enough torque to keep you from rolling backwards rather than put your foot on the brake. I see some people do that. On a car, it doesn't matter. You got a torque converter. It's designed to take that slip. I followed a customer back to the shop here one day, and he was sitting over here at a stoplight, and I'm sitting behind him, and I can hear the RPMs of the motor are revved up. He's not going anywhere. We get here, I'm like, dude, you're going to need a belt. Why? I said, you were sitting there on the throttle without the car moving. So the second you apply throttle, this clutch is always spinning, like Rusty said, and the belt's spinning on this bearing in the center, and the belt's not actually touching these shifts. The second you apply that throttle is when this clutch compresses and tries to grab that belt. If the clutch is compressed, touching the belt, and the belt's not turning, it's like sitting there doing a burnout with your car.
Yeah, it really is. It's just like that. I describe larger tires is a breaker bar on a lug nut getting your car tire off your car. The longer the breaker bar, the easier it is to torque that nut, right? So the same idea applies when you put a larger diameter tire on the same gearing as your vehicle. It's going to shift the same because it thinks, okay, well, I'm going this fast, I'm at this RPM, the clutch is going to shift the same, not knowing there's a different amount of leverage on the drive system coming from the ground down. So it's important to understand that, especially if you're breaking a belt in, because there's that much more pressure when you put an oversized tire on, just because of the size of it. You've all done it on your trucks and your speedometers were off. That's because the area your tire is traveling is now longer than what it was before, so your speedometer could be off a few miles an hour. Same thing applies to your side-by-side. It's a different torque ratio when you put a larger tire on. Not so much the weight of the tire, that has a different result, more to the suspension, but when it comes to the torque delivered back into the system, the longer the radius from the hub to the outside of the tire, the more pressure you have back on your drivetrain, your axles, the belt. So I always recommend these guys sell and install clutch kits. And what that clutch kit will do is it one of two things. It changes the way that the shift points are in the CVT system. So instead of the clutch closing and engaging at 1 RPM, it might close and engage and stay there for a moment longer, so it stays in a lower gear longer. And that helps a lot with oversized tires, and it helps a lot with belt life and things like that, especially going to the dunes where there's a lot of drag and you're on the gas all the time. or if you've got oversized tires and you leave it in high gear, or if you're fully loaded with people and gear, having a clutch kit will really help keep your vehicle in a lower gear longer. And that keeps a lot of the pressure off the belt, a lot of the pressure off the rest of the drive system. So that's something to keep in mind too.
It's called a team tied, which means this sheave and this sheave open and close together. Other style secondaries, they twist as they open and close, which causes the belts to grub. These move open and close without any twist. What it relies on are these rollers right here. Polaris for years has used a certain compound on these plastic rollers that fails. I've seen it fail in 1,000 miles. I mean, it depends on how well you maintain them, how well you keep the dirt out of them. Either way, those rollers will fail. When they get a flat spot on them and they no longer roll, now they're sliding on that aluminum channel. That aluminum's soft, it's got dust on it. It doesn't take very long for it to slide up and down before it actually wears that aluminum channel. So the difference, so since 2011, that's been an issue with Polaris's, right? That roller flattens out. If you don't catch it soon enough, it tears up that clutch. Aftermarket companies sell a different compound roller. It actually has a little bit of a dry lube on it. It will last. I don't think we've sold hundreds of these here, and I don't think we've had any fail yet. Stock ones, they fail within 1,000 miles. It's still a wear item. This isn't a lifetime guarantee. It's still a plastic roller that will eventually wear out. But it is a guarantee that's going to last twice as long as that stock one. And if you catch it in time, you can replace the roller without having to replace the whole clutch. If that clutch is bad enough because it wasn't caught in time, that it's going to need a whole clutch. So Polaris, in their wisdom, they decide, because instead of changing the material of that roller like aftermarket has done, they decided to put a square slider in its place. So any RZR, General, or Ranger 2016 and newer is going to come with this square slider instead of that round roller. Now a square slider, this will last forever. There's nothing to fail. It's already square. It just sits there and slides. The problem is, within 1,500 miles and the dust we have here, that clutch has already got that same half moon on them two channels. It already starts to wear because this square slider is going up and down like a piece of sandpaper. So
and there's torque on it too, so it's being torqued as well. So that slider and roller's gotta slide while it's under a load from the motor being delivered back to the transmission. So that's why it's a tricky thing. 2015 and older, run the stock rollers until they fail. You know, as long as you check them every service. Once you start to notice any flat spots, replace them with an upgraded roller. 2016 and newer, throw these things away as soon as you can and put in a roller in its place. Otherwise, I mean, we've had RZRs in here at 2,500 miles that we've had to throw the clutches away because they never replaced these. You don't want to rotate the clutch backwards or clockwise. If you're trying to unwind those cords and stuff that are wrapped around the clutch, you don't want to rotate that engine backwards because it's got a hydraulic timing chain tensioner, and if you're rotating it backwards, you could jump cam timing, cause severe engine damage. So you always want to rotate this clutch if you're trying to get cords and debris out of it. Rotate it counterclockwise as it would be spinning if the engine was running. The housing should be 100% sealed if everything is like it's supposed to be. So the only way to get water in there is if your water level's all the way up above your exhaust vent is your lowest one. That's the one I mentioned. It goes right above the header pipe. That's lower than your intake. So basically seat level is where water starts getting into the clutch. In the event that say you got carried away washing it and you go to drive around the block and you can tell that belt's slipping because you got some water in there through that vent, all of the clutch housings have a drain. It's usually a little red plug on the Polaris's. Can-Ams have one of some sort too. So without pulling the whole cover off, you can pull that little red plug and drain the water that way. Usually what I would do in the event of having water in there is once I pull that plug out, I'll start the machine and in park or neutral, I'll rev it up. Because that's going to spin them clutches and it's going to create airflow, and you'll see it'll blow out that hole, that drain hole, and then you can put it back in. If you ever do get water on the belt and it's slipping,
and you can tell it's slipping because your engine RPMs are revving, but your car's not moving like it should, unless you're going to float down the river, you need to stop immediately. We've seen some examples, maybe even been my wife, that slipped her belt because it was wet. The belt didn't fail. It actually destroyed all of the aluminum off the clutch. And I don't know if it's just the hot versus the cold, you know, maybe it's slipping, so the aluminum clutch was getting really hot, but then the belt was hitting the water. I can't explain it, but there was no metal left here on these clutch shifts. It exploded that primary clutch and the belt was fine. So you don't want to, if you have any belt slippage, you want to stop before it does other damage.
All right, well, thank you for viewing our Tech Talk. We do our Tech Talks on a monthly basis, typically the third week of every month. We'd love for people to come down, be able to be part of the presentation and ask questions. We're always available. As our sign above our door says, advice is always free. So we're here to help and support. If there's anything that we can do to help your vehicle and answer any questions for you, we'd love to be a part of it. And we're here to be a service to the side-by-side.